All right, so hi everybody. Good late afternoon, I guess we'll say this is. My name is Kristen. We are all gathering here for virtual beginner yoga here at Elle Studio Wellness. And Katie's just gonna help me out with the distance here on the computer to make sure that everybody can see me. Good, okay, awesome, great. Cool, so we are here today to practice and discuss beginner's yoga. This is something I've been really excited about for a little bit. So what I want you to do, we're just gonna chat a little bit in the beginning before we get into some postures. So I want to make sure that you have your mat or designated floor space, that you have something to sit on. So maybe that's a cushion, maybe that's a block, maybe there's just a few pillows, chair, anything that helps you to get really grounded and sit comfortably while we kind of have this opening discussion. We are going to talk about a lot of different props, some of which you may have around your house, some that you maybe aren't even sure that you need just yet. So you'll see a couple of things around me that I'm not mentioning. That's fine, we'll get into that a little bit later. So just to start, beginner's yoga. This is, again, like I mentioned, a super exciting topic for a few reasons. For the first reason, I guess the main reason, most practitioners of yoga, most yoga teachers will agree that what we're trying to do here is kind of demystify the whole process of what yoga is, how to get into yoga. A lot of people, there's a lot of fear surrounding beginning a yoga practice. Sometimes you feel like you can't possibly do those crazy poses that you see people getting into, or you feel like you're not flexible enough. Maybe you feel like you're too young, like you're too old, you're too this, you're too that, your body isn't right for the practice. There's lots of different messages that we receive around the practice of yoga. So starting your own practice from the beginner standpoint is a really cool and a really exciting place to be. So if you're here now or you're watching this in the future, you're already taking the first step, you're already starting your practice. So good for you, you're doing it. So just in terms of starting a yoga practice, being a beginner, something that I want to touch on is that the very first thing, the most important thing, is to approach this sense of a practice with a beginner's mind. That's the most important part of this. It doesn't matter what your body is like, it doesn't matter how you are showing up today. The beginner's mind is the most important part now. And I would say pretty much moving forward into your practice, no matter how many years you've been practicing. It's important to approach each posture with this sense of experimentation. So from a personal standpoint, I've been practicing yoga for almost a decade now, kind of on and off, more seriously over the past 5, going on 6 years since I started teaching it. And what I would do when I first started was I would see the pose, I would see the teacher show me the pose, and what I would immediately do was become frustrated if I couldn't mirror that pose exactly, almost to the letter. It would just feel like a lot of pushing and a lot of pulling in a lot of different directions. So something that I've understood moving into my own beginner's mind, really, as I go deeper into my practice, is this understanding that every single pose is an experiment. It's an opportunity to check in to see where you are that day, how you're showing up that day, what that looks like for you, what that feels like for you, and to try and eradicate this sense of good or bad. So in a lot of different scientific processes, there's always experimentation to get to a certain point. And along the way, there are a lot of what you might perceive as failures, right? So there could be something that just doesn't work, doesn't connect, it doesn't give you the desired results. But that doesn't mean that it's bad, and that doesn't mean that it was a failure. It just means that that combination was not delivering the desired outcome. So that's how I want you to think about each pose that you move into. What combination do I need to access the desired outcome? So another thing to consider while looking at this as a sense of experimentation is to always be checking in with your body. So you do that in a few ways. The first way is to experience the sensation fully. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So when you're in a yoga pose, there will be poses that will be challenging. There will be poses that will feel maybe even quote unquote hard, you know, like maybe it's not super easy, maybe it requires a little bit more cerebral mentality to get to this point of feeling like you can access the pose. So before you move into a pose, before you really go for the gold in the pose, what I want you to do is tune in to your sensation. How does it feel? If at any point your sensations start veering into anything that feels sharp, anything that feels painful, that's a good cue for you to take yourself out of it. When working with flexibility, when working with building strength, there's always going to be an element of mind over matter. There's going to be moments that you are forced to push through. And that's totally fine. That's learning a practice, that's building. There's always a moment where your body wants to stop, or your mind wants to stop, and you have to navigate through that and continue. If at any point you feel something sharp, or you feel something painful, that is not the same thing as perseverance. That could cause injury. So just be gentle with yourself. Take this slow, take this easy. Always check in with my sensations. How does this feel? And then you can always have the option of pulling out and reassessing. So just starting from a neutral, getting out, and then finding your way back in. Okay? The other way that I want you to constantly be checking in is with your breath. So within the process of yoga, the breath is arguably the most important factor. We start with a calming breath, we start with a centering breath, and then what we do is try to maintain that breath throughout the rest of the practice. As the practice becomes more challenging, as you do more than simply sit and breathe, your breath will fluctuate in accordance with that. And that's part of the practice. You know, it's almost like you're holding a chalice that is filled to the brim with the liquid. And when you're walking on solid ground, it's really easy. But when the ground starts curving, when the wind starts blowing, you have to navigate to make sure that you're holding that chalice in the perfect way so that nothing's spilling out. So just think of your breath like that. You're holding a full cup. How do you need to navigate that cup to make sure that the breath is there? Another really powerful cue is when your breath disappears. Now, this is a really common thing that a lot of people beginning their practice will do. Most of us don't even really know how to breathe anyway, right? It's something that I learned when I started on my journey down this whole practice, that breathing is also a practice. So it's understandable if you're new to this and you're in a challenging pose, you may just stop breathing completely because you're focusing so intently on what you want your body to do. That's a really good cue that maybe you're pushing a little too hard in that direction and you have to, again, pull out and reassess. And this is normal, right? This is the kind of thing, I even still stop breathing, and I've been doing this for a long enough time to know that I'm supposed to continue breathing. So this is a very, very powerful cue. So the cues we're going to be looking for: any pain, anything sharp, and lack of breath. That is an indicator that it's time to pull out, okay? So that is something that I want you to consider within your beginner's mind. These are your cerebral tools of experimentation. And those are really, really important as you move forward. And it's also just really important to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break here. You know, those perfect yoga poses that we see, they're beautiful, they're inspiring, they're awesome, but that's not necessarily a reality. You know, you think of how many times did that person have to try to get that perfect angle? Who was helping them get into that angle? Just don't believe everything you see. That's essentially what I'm saying, okay? The second thing to consider, especially as a beginner, is the use of props. So I've got lots of different props around me right now. Let me make sure that they're all out. So props, so many different emotions, so many different thoughts around props. What I want to do is take a moment and essentially demystify what props are for you. Something that I hear a lot, and something that I see a lot as a teacher, that I see all the time, is an aversion to using props. Sometimes people feel like they're not really doing yoga if they need assistance, if they need something to kind of prop their body or work with their body. If they can't touch the floor, then they're failing. If they can't lift their leg in a certain way, then they're failing. If they can't maintain balance without help, then somehow that's a failure. And this is, again, a really exciting aspect for me of our conversation that we're having right now to demystify some of that. So I want to share a quote with you by a man named BKS Iyengar. So Iyengar is one of the fathers of the yogic tradition as we know it today, in particular because his method, his theories of yoga involved introducing props into the system. So I have a quote from him. "The body is the prop for the soul. So why not let the body be propped by a wall or a block?" And I love that. When I heard that, that really opened up some of the ego that I had in my own practice about using props. For a really long time, I was like, no, I'm not going to use blocks. I'm not going to use a strap. Everything that I just said before, if I can't reach it, then I'm not really doing it. And what I didn't understand at the time was that by pushing and pulling and dragging my body into a sequence and into poses that my body wasn't quite ready for, I wasn't really building strength and I wasn't really building endurance. I was just kind of getting through it. My body wasn't really learning anything because I wasn't letting it have the breaks that it needed, and I wasn't giving it the support that it needed as well. So props are your friend, especially in the beginning phases of your yoga practice. This is something that you will not only feel a sense of safety with, but you'll also really be accessing the props how you need to access the props. So that brings me into another aspect of what props are, really. Think of the prop as an extension of your body. So this isn't a block. This is an extension of my arm. This is an extension of my palm. This isn't a strap. This is an extension of my muscles, of my ligaments that's helping me to connect the dots. This isn't just a bolster. Again, this is bringing the floor up to meet me. This is a support system. This is a security blanket. This isn't a chair. The chair is its own magical, beautiful playground. But the chair, this is, again, bringing the floor up as high as I need it. This is an element of stabilization. This is a safety place. This is almost like an aerial space where I can access poses if I can't touch my knees to the ground. There's so many beautiful different aspects that come into bringing a chair into your practice. So I want you to think of props as a means of empowerment, okay? A means of empowerment. If you pick up a block in a pose, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you can't do it. It's because you know exactly what tools you need to make this sequence fit you and your body, your level of ability, your level of physical comprehension. For some of us, we may always need to have props in our practice, and that's amazing. It doesn't have to be a stepping stone that you eventually graduate out from. For certain bodies, a chair is always going to be necessary. A block is always going to be necessary. For certain bodies, a strap, a bolster, a blanket, there's certain things that for certain bodies will always be a part of the picture. So it doesn't have to necessarily, like the yogi on the mountaintop out in nature, that's beautiful, it's a great idea, but that could be a really crappy practice for some of us if we're not perfectly equipped with what we need. So again, think of this as empowerment, not any hindrance. This is just a means for you to take something externally and customize it to exactly what you need, what your physical structure, your skeleton needs, okay? So I hope that helps. I hope that makes you feel a little bit looser, a little bit more excited about the practice of yoga. Moving into what common props you'll hear. Okay? So especially on a virtual platform, so many of us are experiencing yoga for the first time virtually. So you may hear some things that don't necessarily make sense to your understanding. There are certain different terms in different parts of the world. I don't know all of them, but I know some of them change. There's some variance. So just when you know the basic one, you can kind of infer what exactly they're talking about. So the first and most common are yoga blocks. You may also hear these as referred to as yoga bricks. So that's really the only example I have, yoga block or yoga brick. They come in a lot of different textures, a lot of different firmness. We have cork blocks here. Some blocks are really foamy, they're a lot softer. It really just depends on your preference. You may love foam in the beginning and go to something a little bit more sturdy. It may be the opposite, you may not care at all. Another thing to consider as we all practice from home these days is that if you do not have yoga blocks at home, a firm stack of books can be helpful. I prefer using pots personally just because they're a little bit more mobile. So if you have these, if you don't have these, just know that this is the most prominent thing that you'll hear throughout practicing yoga. The second thing is a blanket. So blanket is kind of like a sleeper prop. It seems really obvious for what it is. It's a blanket. It's something you put over you. It's something you put under you. But there's actually way, way, way more you can do with this blanket if you let yourself be creative. If you don't have any kind of thicker, larger blanket at home, you can use towels. You can use a few towels over you. So just know that you have some variants too. Blanket doesn't just mean like the thick, beautiful yoga studio blanket. That can mean the fuzzy blanket on your bed. That can mean like the knitted throw on your couch, just anything that you have. So blanket is, again, really powerful, really special. Too much to get into with how amazing the blanket is right now. But this is another prop to have in your toolkit. Another one is a strap. I love working with straps. This is a prop that has, again, a lot of different uses, more than seems like the obvious. So a strap is great for flexibility, for increasing and working with flexibility. It's also really good at meeting you exactly where you are now. So I used a strap for a really, really long time in order to be able to access this pose I keep doing here. I keep doing it because this is my personal memory of working with this. So what I'm doing is, in the past, I was unable to bring my fingers together. I've been able to do that now because of working with the strap. So before I was able to do that, the strap was simply an extension of my hands and my arms, right? So this is, again, super, super, super powerful. Again, lots of other ways to use the strap, too many to get into in this one class. If you don't have a strap at home or something that's like a certified particular yoga studio strap, you can use a belt, you can use a tie, a couple of different like scarves knitted together. Anything that's long and that extends your arms. So working from home, that's a great thing to add. Bolster. This is another really powerful prop that just seems kind of, I guess as I say this, they are all way more powerful than they seem. There's way more uses than the immediate looking at just, this is just a pillow. But again, this can be lots of other things. So this is, the bolster is used predominantly in practices like restorative yoga. So predominantly practices where the body is much stiller, where there's way less movement, and the practice is more about rest and relaxation. So this is almost like your home base. This is also an element that is really powerful if you're going to be sitting for a long time, if you have limited flexibility, or you just know that you've got tightness. Limited flexibility, tightness, kind of interchangeable. This is a great way to lift your seat up off of the ground so that you feel nice and comfortable. If you do not have a yoga studio bolster at your house, you can use a couch pillow, maybe like along the one that sits along the back, like the back of the couch cushion. You can use a couple of pillows kind of stuck together to make this approximative shape. My favorite way to compose a bolster is to take a few blankets or towels, usually 2 to 3, and just roll those up really, really nice and tight so that you have some sort of thick, like a thick surface area. So that's a great way to make your own bolster if you don't have one at home. Okay, so that's another prop. The other prop, the chair, the majestic chair. So with using a chair, again, like I said, this is a playground of opportunity. Chairs are really excellent. If you're a beginner, it's not a bad idea to have one in general, especially if you know that limited flexibility or any blood pressure concerns, maybe even a past surgery, something with your knees, back, anything with your legs, anything essentially with like the spine and the lower body, which is a lot of your body. So this is a really great addition to your practice. Specifically of something without armrest, and the reason why is because you want the surface area of the seat simply because of what that can offer. And so just to even give an example, you're sitting in your chair. This is already easier than you sitting up against the floor. So this is a little bit easier. You can swing your knees over to the side, this knee down. Now we're opening up this side of the body. You can extend this leg all the way back, and now we're in like a bigger, more comfortable pose. You can stand up tall when you're bending over. This can be a version of a downward facing. This can be a forward fold. There's so many different aspects to use with your chair. So especially if you're a beginner, I just recommend keeping this in your back pocket, knowing that this is an option for you. Okay, another prop, which is kind of, I guess there are two more to consider, and those are the wall and the floor. Now, the reason I mentioned these two things is that balance is a part of a lot of yoga practices. There are certain standing postures, there are certain elements where one foot is on the ground or one hand is on the ground and the other is out in the air, lifting off to the side, to the back, lots of different things. It is never a sign of any kind of weakness to just take your mat over to the wall. And I mean that in a public class or in your own home. Feel the empowerment of knowing that that wall is not only there to catch you, but it's also there to support you. So walls around your house, walls in a yoga studio as well. If you've ever taken a restorative practice, a lot of poses occur against the wall. So the wall can act, like I was saying, as a very restorative space as well. So just thinking of that surrounding, this very common thing that you see all the time as one of your props that you can always use. And the other one being the floor. The floor comes into play as a prop as kind of, when you think there are different poses that require staying straight up against the ground. So for example, when you're in a plank pose, your arms are up, your feet are back. You can start using the floor as a prop if you simply gently lower your knees. And then there you go. Then there's something that's catching you. There's something that's supporting you. You're still activating the pose. You're just making it work to your body, utilizing something that is literally there all the time, something that we're constantly in contact with, some version of the ground, some version of a floor space beneath us. Whew. All right, so that was a lot of words. I hope that that starts to open your mind a little bit. Open your mind to the fact that yoga truly is for everybody, every level of ability. Yoga is for anybody who is curious about breathing, moving, and experimenting with how they feel in different poses. Okay, so with that in mind, we've got our toolkit. We are going to only need today a clear designated mat space, potentially a blanket, potentially 2 blocks, and or pots, and or books. Okay, so this is up to you what you have around the house. Today, you may just move through this and see how it feels. Experiment with different props as you go. So don't feel super stressed out if you don't have all of that around you right now. Think of this more as an informational session rather than a full body flow. So what we are going to need, I will keep with me, I will slide the rest off to the side. And what I'd like you to do is find a taller seat than against the floor. So you may already be there. What I just did is slid a blanket underneath so that my hips are slightly higher than my heels, higher than my knees. This will help you to find a taller seat. Now you can continue to elevate the seat as high as you need to. You may grab some more blankets, maybe some more pillows. You may be really, really tall. You may take it into a chair if that's something that you know that you need. or maybe something that you think that you might need. Okay? So we have our toolkit, we have our designated mat space, and now what we're going to do is bring all of that external thought process, all of that external processing internally now. What I want you to do is spin your hands up, roll your shoulders a few times, take a deep breath in, and exhale. Start to rest your eyes or close your eyes completely. Now, just as we discussed, starting to find our breath. So this is that moment of experimentation. The practice begins the moment you sit down and make the decision that practicing is something you're going to do today. You feel the breath moving in through your nose. Start to fill your lungs from the bottom, up through the middle, up towards the top, as if you could sink the breath under your collarbones. And as you exhale, release through your jaw with a gentle HA. Continuing at your own pace, again, taking this moment of experimentation. Notice how your breath is coming in. Maybe your breath is really short, feeling even choppy. Maybe your breath is smooth and languid and long. What we're looking for here is almost the element of a circle. If you're breathing in a circle, you take your breath in, you feel the fullness. Think of this as the front of the circle. You feel the circle rise to the top of your breath. And now we descend to the back of the circle as you exhale. Feel the breath rushing out. The diaphragm lifts, the lungs empty, and you come back to the bottom. What I'd like you to do is imagine you are able to make this circle bigger from the front and the back each time you breathe in. So you're increasing the circumference of this circle with each breath in and each breath out. As you continue the mechanism of your breathing, just listen into the sound of my voice. We take this centering breath in the beginning of our practice, and some teachers will ask you to do this, others won't. Some practices demand that you take your opening centering breath, others simply get right to it. Especially as you begin your practice, as you start to lay the framework for what you choose to build into what yoga looks like to you, I encourage you to always take this moment. Check in with your breath. Think of this moment as the very beginning of your practice. Our practice begins in the breath and our practice begins in the mind. So thinking of this as a clearing of the slate. Whatever else you did before this moment, whatever else you're planning on doing after, it all comes back to this point. This is this moment that you've carved out to fill with your practice, to fill with breath, to fill with movement. Keep filling that circle, feeling the circumference become bigger and wider. If, like me, you have your socks on, this is a good time to take them off. You want your feet to connect firmly and completely with whatever surface you have beneath you, whether that's the mat or the floor, outside the grass, whichever. You want your feet to connect to the ground. And then opening your eyes very, very slowly. Just return back to the room, return back to our connection here. Another thing to consider, as you move between postures, sometimes it won't be a part of a definable sequence, as you'll see right now. It's important to take your time with every single movement that you make and start to infuse this sense of reverence in every posture. So it's not just standing up and getting to the mat and you just, you don't think and you arrive there. It's how do you need to maneuver your body to press against the floor, to lift? Do you need to use a prop to help you get there? And this may change throughout the day. Some days I don't need anything, other days I need a lot of assistance. So this is important to listen in. Let each moment move through your body with just as much reverence as if it were a part of the definable sequence. Okay? So we are going to take our standing position up at the top of our mat. Slide off any props off to the side. So I have my blanket. I'm going to keep that handy just in case I need it. And now I'm arriving here at the top of the mat. So I'll face you to show you what this looks like. So what we're going to do is move through a classical version of Surya Namaskar. So you'll hear that a lot in yoga classes. And what this means is the Surya is sun, Namaskar, Namas is, the root of Namaskar is Namas, and this is to bow to, or to worship, to love, to pay homage, reverence to. So sun salutations. It is called that because it is a somewhat, it's a pretty dynamic sequence of postures, and this is one of the most classical forms of yoga. So a lot of traditions will start with this practice of beginning. This is our warm-up, quote unquote, but this also can be a practice in and of itself. And when beginning a yoga practice on your own, this is a phenomenal place to start. Not that many poses, gets you into the practice of memorization, and it's a beautiful playground for you to start experimenting with what you need to add and what you need to subtract in terms of props for your body. The first pose is called mountain pose, and we're not going to use the Sanskrit terms today. That's a much deeper dive into a little bit more traditional styles, the traditional style, but we're going to stick with the English translations for now, the modern translations. So mountain pose, slight bend of your knees and opening of your palms. Roll your shoulders up and then slowly drift them down. Lift your toes and then lift your heels. Feel the fullness of your foot rooting down through the floor. Sometimes it is even helpful to imagine literal roots growing down out of the bottom of your feet. Feel your chin slowly lift away from the center of your chest. So not lifting your head, just lifting your chin. The soft palate at the top of your mouth, feel it start to release any tension. Spinning your palms facing forward as you activate the arms. Your navel reaches in slightly towards your spine. So when I say that, that isn't a tucking in or a sucking in of the stomach. That's simply another activation point. Think of it like a strong magnet, the back of your navel to the front of your spinal cord. So mountain pose is where we begin. As you breathe in, start to reach your arms high up overhead and watch your fingers as they reach towards the ceiling. So you can see my chin is lifted up. If you feel your shoulders start to crunch up towards your ears, roll your shoulders back, maybe even open your hands. For those of us with tight shoulders, maybe even a lot of muscle here, a lot of mass here, any kind of mass, any kind of tightness in the chest, this may be really hard. This may crunch the spine. So again, this is our first moment of adjustment. If this doesn't work for you, simply open up the arms. You want to feel expansive and lifted. Slight bend of the knees here, press the hands together. On our exhale, we'll slide the hands down through the heart center and come into a forward fold. Now pausing here, this is another excellent moment of experimentation. Before using any props, let your body drift down and just see what needs to happen here. For those of us with limited flexibility in our hamstrings, calves, back, really whatever, limited flexibility here. If at any point you feel like your hands are too far away from the ground, what you can do is start to build the ground up towards you. So this may look like putting blocks here. This may look like a chair. If this is even too far, your hands may come up to the top of the chair. Okay, so again, this is our very first moment of adding tools into the pose. The reason that you want the floor to reach up to you as opposed to reaching down towards the floor is essentially because of the potential for injury. So you don't want to pull or push something. This does not build flexibility. This does. You want to keep your muscles happy. You want to keep your tendons happy. You want to work with where you are to slowly increase your way forward. So another aspect here is the bending of the knees. So you'll notice if I keep my legs straight, I'm a little bit more lifted away from the ground, my knees are locked, all of that stuff. Because I have pretty tight hamstrings just naturally, I'm always going to be bending my knees in a forward fold. Maybe someday I'll be able to have straight legs, my body will be floating down, but until that day arrives, my knees are going to be bent. Especially in the beginning of building your practice, I highly encourage you to work with your bent knees. So we have our forward fold, however that fits into your body. And you want to release your head and neck. Pressing down into your heels, feel the sensation of the sits bones start to lift towards the ceiling. And as you feel that incremental lifting, feel the crown of the head reaching a little further down towards the ground. So this is like pulling a chain high, and then the anchor is connected to your head. You'll notice I'm maintaining the tops of my thighs to my torso here. I'm checking in with my breath. I'm still thinking of this circle, filling it deeply, having a big breath in and a big breath out, continuing to fill this circle. And I should mention there are many different versions of a Surya Namaskar or a sun salutation. We are doing the classical version today. So this one is a little bit more approachable. There's less moving parts to consider. On the next inhale, taking a half lift. So half lift occurs with the hands pressing against the knees, shoulders rolling back, or pardon me, the shins underneath the knees, shoulders rolling back. And you're aiming for an even plane between the crown of the head and your tailbone. So as if you could place a plate or a cup right on the back. Now again, this is a perfect option to start adding your props in. For some of us, this may not be possible. This just may not work out. This is a great opportunity to, again, take your blocks at the highest height. If you're taller, you may need another set of blocks to lift yourself up. This is also another perfect opportunity to work with the chair. So in this instance, you place your hands against the seat of the chair, shoulders roll back, and you're working here with this lengthening of the crown of the head, of the tailbone. Okay, so we have our version of half lift. Feel that navel, that sensation of the navel reaching towards the front of the spine. That magnetization, this activation point in the center of the trunk of the body. Take one more deep breath here. And exhale, find your version of forward fold. Now, from here you'll press your hands down, and then we're going to step our feet back. So this is another really interesting pose that usually requires a lot more tailoring than we think initially. So we're in a plank pose now. What I highly recommend in starting a beginning practice is to lower your knees. And just listen to me here. So stay on your knees and just listen to me right now. So when we move back into our plank, what we are starting to get into is something called a chaturanga. I'll show you what that looks like now. So your hands are lifted. On the exhale, you bend your elbows, lower the body in a straight plane, untuck your toes, inhale into an upward facing dog. Okay? For a lot of us, those postures are not only not super approachable in the beginning, but they can be very painful as well. So with the beginner's mind, with the beginner's understanding of experimentation, this is a perfect opportunity to think of the floor as your prop right now. So instead of moving into our plank with the knees lifted, we're going to bend our knees and place our knees down against the ground. Another aspect for a prop, if you have sensitive knees, you can keep a blanket right on top of your mat. That's another really great way to protect yourself. So our knees are here. On the exhale, instead of lowering down in a straight plane, you're going to bend your elbows and lower down your chest and your chin. So you feel your hips slightly lifted still. So instead of moving into an upward facing dog, lengthen your legs behind you. Keep your hip points pressed down through the ground and inhale to lift into what we call a cobra pose. So it's a little bit easier on the lower back. There's a little bit, you're using the floor very much as a prop. You're pressing away from the floor as opposed to lifting up into gravity. Just take a few breaths here. Feel into your body. What does this feel like in my body? And now exhale, lower your head down. Tuck your toes, feel your knees pressing through the ground. On the inhale, come into a tabletop pose. So our hands are pressed down right through our shoulders. Knees are underneath our hips. Another moment of adjustment here. If you have any, so for some of us, this feels totally fine. For other of us, we have sensitivity in our wrists that happen pretty much immediately. If that is the case, you have two options. First is you can walk your hands forward a little bit, so this takes some of that direct pressure right out of your, the heels of your hands and out of your wrists. Or you can take either your mat and just roll that up so that the heels of the hands are a little bit lifted, or you can take a blanket and slide that right under as well. So that can apply in this position, that can apply in downward facing dog. Don't be afraid to mess your mat around. The mat's great. Like, the mat doesn't have to be this perfect thing. The mat in itself is really a prop as well. In fact, it definitely is a prop. I think that we're so used to seeing mats as like a status thing or, you know, an aspect of yoga, but traditional yogis didn't even use mats. This is very much a Western concept. So don't be precious about your mat. It's there to serve you, not the other way around. So we're in our tabletop pose. And then take the adjustments that are necessary for your body. Point your toes to the back of the room. Press the tops of your feet down. Roll your shoulders back. And just like in our half lift, find an even plane of the body between the crown of the head and the tailbone. Find that activation between the back of the navel, the front of the spinal cord. And just find your breath here. Tuck your toes. Take a deep breath in. And now on your exhale, press through your hands, up through your fingertips and your hips back, and then lift your hips high, downward facing dog. Now this pose, also, lots of different applications here. So what you're seeing me do is the pose that you usually see. This is the most typical representation of downward dog. The heels are almost to the ground. I'm lifted in the tailbone. I'm pressing down through our hands. For a lot of us, this is not possible. So a couple of different ways to access this pose. Thinking about the ground being too far away. We can put our hands on top of blocks. And then this will help us to lengthen the back of the legs from a safe perspective. This is excellent for any kind of limited flexibility. Again, you can even lift this even higher and continue to bring the floor up to you. Another aspect working with the front of the body is with our chair. So a little different than our half lift is bringing the hands up to the top of the chair, finding your feet underneath your hips, and then reaching your heart center down. The main point of downward facing dog is really to open the chest and lengthen through the legs. So however your body needs to express that, you're doing the pose. Mechanisms are the same. So find this pose, use the props that your body's asking for, and then we'll get into the mechanisms of this pose, so beyond the props. You'll bend your knees. Again, just like in our forward fold, we want the bent knees. We want the torso reaching to the tops of the thighs. Feel your heart opening and slightly melting towards the floor. Chin in towards your chest, look down towards your knees, back past your legs even. And as you lift your sits bones high, again, find that lift of the sits bones, exhale, start to lengthen your heels down towards the floor. Now you want to keep a gentle micro bend in the knees, and the reason for that is because you don't want to start locking your knees. This is where injury can occur. And finding your breath, and finding your beginner's mind specifically in this pose. It's really easy to start judging yourself because it's not quote unquote perfect. It's not what you've seen before. You just find your sense of experimentation. Finding your breath, continuing to encourage this circle to be deep and open. Now, start to look up towards your hands. So whether that's on blocks or whether that's on the chair. Bend your knees. Start to walk your feet towards your hands. Just bend your knees as much as you need to. Sometimes you may need to walk your hands back towards your feet. Find a forward fold, however your body needs to express that. So forward fold once more. Because I'm a little bit in the middle of my mat, I want to walk my feet up to the top. And now I'll bend my knees, and starting with the tailbone, start to stack vertebrae on top of vertebrae. to lift and roll my spine up. You always want a bent knee here. Shoulders sink into place. Once the head lifts, the arms follow. Deep breath in, press the hands together. Exhale, hands through heart center. Okay, so we're going to do this sequence now. I'm just going to walk us through it once. We're going to go through this sequence once. What I want you to do is, taking that beginner's mind, utilize your toolkit however you need to. Okay, so whether that means lifting the floor up with your blocks, moving to a chair. I'm not going to cue those specific points. I'm going to let you take that experimentation. We'll take lots of breaths and move through this sequence very slowly. Starting with hands at heart center. Take a deep breath in. Exhale, open your hands towards the front of the room. Starting in our mountain pose. Slight bend of the knees, a lift through the crown of your head. On the inhale, reach your arms out, up, overhead. On the exhale, lower your heart center down, float your hands with your shoulders, torso, forward fold. Keeping the knees bent, feeling the torso resting on the top of the thighs, pressing down through your heels to lift through your tailbone, lowering your head. Imagine your torso was like water spilling over the tops of your thighs. On the next inhale, half lift. Navel reaches to spine. Find that magnetization, that plane from the crown of your head all the way back through the tailbone. On the exhale, bending your knees, placing both hands on either side of your feet, stepping both feet back and lowering down to your knees. Keeping your toes tucked here, feeling your knees and your hands rooting down through the floor. Take a deep breath in. As you bend your elbows, exhale to lower your chest down, keeping your hips lifted. Rooting your hands through the floor, untuck your toes. As you inhale, lifting your chest forward. So lengthening your legs back behind you, pressing into the tops of your feet as you lift your chest and your head up away from the floor. Cobra pose. You don't even have to come this high. You may just come right here. Maybe even lower. Again, checking in with your breath. How does this feel in my body? How does this feel in my breath? And then tucking the toes again. Keeping your elbows in towards your rib cage as you exhale. Press the torso up away from the ground. Tabletop pose. Tuck the toes, take a deep breath in. As you exhale, lift the hips, lengthen the heels. Downward facing dog. Traditionally, in this classical sequence, you would take 5 breaths here in this pose. So we won't do the full 5 today, but just know that that is an aspect of this flow sequence. Keep rooting down through the heels, lifting high through the hips. Shoulders roll away from the ears, gaze is back by your knees. Now looking up between your hands, wherever your hands happen to be. Bending your knees, start to walk your feet towards your hands, maybe walk your hands towards your feet, coming back to a forward fold. Finding that bending in your knees, the torso rippling over the tops of the thighs like water. Keeping your knees bent, keeping your heels rooted on the inhale. Slowly begin to roll all the way up to stand. As the head lifts, arms follow. Bring the hands down through heart center, walk to the top of your mat. And arrive wherever you begin. Take a deep breath in, and a deep breath out. Making your way down towards the floor, however you need to get there. Again, remember, adding this moment of reverence into every single one of your postures. Making your way down to the floor in a final resting pose of Shavasana. So corpse pose, final resting pose. This is where you end all of your yogic practices. So this can be kind of a tricky one as well. For some of us, laying flat against the floor is totally fine. If you have sensitivities in your lower back, you may want to lift your knees up. So that can come into play with your blanket, that can come into play with your bolster. For some of us, we may have some shoulder sensitivity, so we want to bring the blanket underneath our head. For some of us, we may just want to cover ourselves up completely. Know that all of these options are available to you. Again, making the pose fit you, not the other way around. And just feeling your body start to digest the postures. And your body start to feel all of the oxygen that was just moving all the way through it. Bringing your knees up towards the ceiling, rolling over slowly to one side, pressing your hand down and rising back up to a seated pose, whether that means getting into a chair, sitting up on your pillow, sitting up on your blanket. Bringing your hands together, again, resting your eyes. And thanking yourself for your bravery. For starting something new. Maybe you've been practicing already for a little bit. You just wanted to dig a little bit deeper. Thanking yourself for your bravery. And whenever you peel back bravery, what you find is vulnerability. So Being grateful for that, being grateful for your courage. And as you move deeper down into this journey of yoga, wherever that takes you, knowing that you always have your props. They're always there to guide you, they're there to help you. Let your breath, let your sensations be your guide, and don't give up. Whatever you find there is valuable. Thank you for joining for this class today. Namaste.